as they are.
Oh, I think we're just as Scottish as they are. In fact, we're more Scottish than they are. And I did actually come here before Maggie Thatcher. She just stuffed it up big time, but I got out before she took charge. It's an absolute no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. Just think of the advantages to both countries. I mean, Scotland and New Zealand have got so much in common. And Waipu, where I live, we are a Scottish town. And to think of the cultural and sporting things that can happen, Rangers and Celtic could give the Wellington Phoenix some decent players. We could give the Scottish rugby team some decent players. It would advantage both of us.
There is no doubt that Scots or people of Scots descent made major contributions to New Zealand in many, many areas, from Peter Fraser to James Wattie to all sorts, the Todd family. They've already done a lot of the shaping of New Zealand, you could argue, as well as Canada. Absolutely,
yes, and they're still doing so. We're still doing so up here in Northland, and we're still shaping the country. Scots are welcome here. We're both friendly people. We're both workers. It's an absolute no-brainer in my mind, and we should push ahead with this.
Yep. I'm all over it. Yep.
Were you surprised at the Canadian claim? I mean, it's partly my ignorance of Canadian history, but I didn't know the Scots' influence was so prominent.
Being involved in Highland Games and so on up here in Waipu, we see the USA and the Canadians, they tend to go a little bit overboard and get above themselves. We're a little bit more down to earth here and more practical. So we could handle it a lot better than the Canadians or Americans could. And the people would go on fine, and it would just absolutely be brilliant.
All right, an absolutely brilliant idea. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
We'll take your word as the last word. George Match of Waipu.
Yeah.
I saw something interesting on Te Ara today, that New Zealand was the first country to give women the vote, as we know.
Yep.
Quote, women whose outlooks were shaped by the Scottish readiness to educate girls played a significant role in the struggle for the franchise, and they included Kate Shepherd and Margaret Sivwright and Jessie Mackay. And so that's an interesting take on Scottishness in New Zealand as well.
There is a distance issue, not going to lie.
Oh, minor?
Little one.
Minor.
I don't want to be that guy who points out the elephant in the room.
You're being very negative about
Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that, Jim. Like, I'm all over it. I almost got the rights to the Tartan Army for New Zealand.
How do you mean you almost got the rights to
the Tartan Army, all the merchandise for the Tartan Army? On a football trip in 2003 to watch New Zealand play in the Confederations Cup, I met the guy who owns the rights to the Tartan Army. Because he's copyrighted it,
someone owns the rights to the Tartan
apparently so. But unless he was talking rubbish. But and we emailed contact, and I was going to be selling it. I don't know what happened.
What would you have done with the franchise?
Oh, I guess through football club, which I'm feel heavily involved. That's where I'd have started, because the big expat Scottish community through football clubs. The local tavern has got Northcote's a Scottish tavern. Yeah, and just gone through probably websites and stuff, Scottish websites, and done it online or something like that, I guess.
Pity that slipped through your fingers.
It's one of the many opportunities.
Have we asked the Scots what they think about the song?
Oh, no, they'll come round.
They'll be right. They'll be fine. Yeah.
In 2004, there were over 80 pipe bands in New Zealand. I just found that stat.
Wow.
Andrew Clay, good luck with your car key.
Oh,
and the house.
And the house.
Yeah, it's probably...
And Leonie Freeman, thank you. Lovely to have you on the panel. Come back soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Here's Checkpoint.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, the shootings in Rolleston, emergency housing and the high cost of it to the taxpayer. If it stops people being homeless, it's money well spent, says the government. But could the money be better spent and still achieve the same purpose? The pay equity settlement was great, says the CTU, but the law it's being framed under isn't anywhere near as good. The Lions are on their way, all 41 of them. Execution season in Arkansas. Bill O'Reilly gets the flick from Fox. The Greens announce a special winter electricity payment. And Fairyland in Newfoundland, where your next door neighbour is an iceberg. All of that and much more in a bumper edition of Checkpoint. And we begin, as always, with the pips.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. A proposed pay equity law has been condemned as fundamentally flawed and a step backwards for women. The Council of Trade Unions says an historic $2 billion settlement this week would not have been possible under the new pay equity bill. The deal came after a caregiver, Christine Bartlett, won a court case for more pay by comparing her female-dominated rest home sector to another industry. Ms. Bartlett argued that if her job employed mostly men, staff would be paid at a higher rate. The union's president, Richard Wagstaff, says the proposed bill limits the ability to make those comparisons between industries.
If you limit yourself to the same industry, you're not necessarily going to find the best comparator. And it's absolutely critical that women making claims for equal pay are able to find comparisons that expose the gender pay gap. And this bill, as it stands, inhibits that.
Richard Wagstaff is hopeful that once the bill goes through the consultation process, the limiting clause will be taken out. The man arrested for shooting 2 women near Christchurch last night has also been charged with holding up the Ashburton Hotel soon afterwards. The 23-year-old appeared in the Christchurch District Court this afternoon on 2 charges, injuring with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and aggravated robbery. The police say the man, who has name suppression, knew the victims. Neighbours say the 2 women are mother and daughter and run a poultry farm. Both are in hospital, one in a serious condition and the other with moderate injuries. Paul Michael, who runs a nearby nursery, paid tribute to his neighbours.
They're very local people and, they've been fantastic, good neighbours and, we're obviously incredibly sad that this event has happened, and it definitely has made all the staff conscious when you think there's some crazed man running around with a rifle.
Paul Michael says his thoughts went out to the family. New Zealand has no plans to follow Australia in introducing a values test for aspiring citizens. The Australian government has unveiled sweeping changes to its migration process to make it tougher to become a citizen. Applicants will be quizzed on whether they support the country's values and will have to pass a stringent English language test. Bill English says he has no intention of copying the Australian policies.
I haven't looked at them in detail. I think there's, it'll no doubt reflects a political debate there. But here in New Zealand, I think there's, confidence in the economy. We're relatively attractive. We welcome New Zealanders staying here and New Zealanders coming home.
The Prime Minister, Bill English. The Green Party thinks a future government should help pay electricity bills for low-income people. It says electricity is too expensive for many and children can get sick from living in cold houses. Eric Frickberg reports.
The Greens say the money would be payable to all households earning less than $50,000 a year and would cover 75% of the average winter rise in power prices. The party insists it would be affordable for the government, costing $112 million, far less than the value of the dividends the state receives from power companies. The party is also pledging to make all electricity renewable by 2030. But in a break with the last election, it's killed off the idea of electricity being bought and sold by a single state agency, New Zealand Power. The Greens would also require electricity companies to reveal more details about their finances and seek mergers or more cooperation among local lines companies. This is Eric Frickberg.
The Christchurch City Council is asking people in Governor's Bay to boil their water following the discovery of E. coli in the township's water supply today. The council says it's possible heavy rain over Easter weekend caused the contamination of a reservoir that supplies water to about 350 properties in the area, but this is yet to be confirmed. A council spokesperson, John Mackey, says the presence of E. coli in the water supply was confirmed by the laboratory this morning after samples were taken yesterday. Mr. Mackey says it will be chlorinating the water to kill the E. coli, but this will take a couple of days. The Canterbury District Health Board says it has not had any notifications of people being sick as a result of the contamination. It's 5:04. To sport, the All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says the British and Irish Lions squad to tour New Zealand bears all the hallmarks of a Warren Gatland coach side. Gatland has named a 41-strong squad for the 10-match tour of New Zealand in June. One of the most notable absentees is England's New Zealand-born captain Dylan Hartley. Hansen says he would have picked Hartley but isn't surprised by Gatland's selections and isn't expecting a free-flowing style of play from the tourists.
I think they'll tell us they will, but I think they'll try and beat us up first. Well, it's pretty much what you'd expect from Warren. He likes his big ball carriers in the middle of the park and his big grunty forward, so that's what he's picked. And I think this is the best British Lions and Irish team that we've seen come here for a long, long time.
Steve Hansen. Barcelona have been unable to turn around their 3-0 defeat against Italian giants Juventus in the second leg match of the Champions League quarter-finals. The match ended in a 0-0 draw, which means Juventus advanced to the final four, along with Monaco, who beat Borussia Dortmund 3-1 to win 6-3 on aggregate. Possible strike action by Australian netballers is threatening this weekend's round of the Super Netball competition. The Australian Netball Players Association has called for the former international Catherine Harvey-Williams to be re-elected to the governing body's board. The association is also threatening to boycott Australia's international matches and form a breakaway domestic competition. That's the news.
A cry in the dark.
Coast Guard volunteers on Papakura Rescue heard a voice and quickly located the 8-year-old girl. She was cold, exhausted and slightly confused.
Shots fired.
It's quite a rural area, so there's only a few roads there and there's not that many houses, a lot of kind of rural farming properties.
A TV host taken off air.
I watch a lot of different stuff. I don't know if everyone agrees with his politics or the way he interviews people, but he has a certain kind of style. The Fox viewership admired that.
We're still in the job. Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson. Morning Report weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, an urban design competition that challenges you to ask what if and what could be. And after 10, the cave scientist who's dedicated 5 decades to documenting over 200 lava caves which lie beneath Auckland. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, cloudy periods and a few showers. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Waidat Upper and Wellington, cloudy periods and a few showers, clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, mainly fine, but a few showers for coastal Marlborough, Golden Bay and northern Buller. Showers clearing Marlborough tonight. Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with isolated showers later. Canterbury and Otago, fine apart from a few showers about Banks Peninsula today. Southland, cloudy periods and a few coastal showers. And the Chatham Islands, showers and strong cold southwesterlies, both easing tomorrow. It's coming up to 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Coming up on the program tonight, emergency housing and its cost. The pay equity settlement legislation, the Lions are coming, 41 players named, executions in Arkansas or not. Bill O'Reilly is gone from Fox. We have a fascinating correspondent on that. The British Parliament votes for that early election, and while it's hitting the fan in Westminster, it's in the lagoon in Piha, if you'll forgive a coarse turn of phrase. All of that coming up on the program over the next hour and 22 minutes. Thank you for being with us. We begin tonight with a man accused of shooting a mother and a daughter in Canterbury, who's also been charged with robbing the Ashburton Hotel at gunpoint a short time later. The 23-year-old man, whose name has been suppressed, appeared in the Christchurch District Court this afternoon. He was charged with 2 counts of injuring with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and with aggravated robbery. Police say the man was known to the victims, who are both in hospital with serious to moderate injuries. Here's our reporter, Colin Young.
The shootings happened at about 10 o'clock last night in an area of lifestyle blocks close to the settlement of Rolleston, about 30 minutes drive south of Christchurch. The police say the offender then drove 60 kilometres south to Ashburton and held up a hotel at gunpoint, firing a shot and making off with cash. A manhunt took place through the night, ending at the remote Rakaya Huts, 60 kilometres to the north of Ashburton, at 7 this morning, when a 23-year-old was arrested by the Armed Offenders Unit. Jem Field was shocked when told by RNZ News what had happened at her neighbour's home.
Oh, far out, far out.
Jem Field said the family, who run a poultry farm, suffered another tragedy about 18 months ago when the father died during a fishing trip.
They were diving and he didn't come up, I think. And in fact, it was the boy that went down and pulled him up, but they couldn't revive him. He might have had a heart attack or something, I don't know. But they're very sort of into the fishing and hunting and that kind of stuff.
She said the mother is well known in the community.
And she's such a bubbly little thing, and it's, you know, everything's dull and sweety and all that kind of stuff. And we always sort of worry that, you know, how would she cope, you know, without him and stuff like that. But she seemed to be getting along okay, and life goes on.
Miss Field's partner, Steve Templer, was also taken aback by the news of the shootings.
I'm really taken aback by that, to be quite honest. Yeah, well known around the district, well known and popular people. That is a bit of a shock. Jeez.
Paul Michael, who runs a nearby nursery, also paid tribute to his neighbours.
They're very local people and, they've been fantastic, good neighbours and, we're obviously incredibly sad that this event has happened, and it definitely has made all the staff conscious when you think there's some crazed man running around with a rifle.
His thoughts went out to the family.
Yeah, we'll be ripping through them, and I think with their husband dying not that long ago, it's going to be a very tough time for them. And just the psychological effect, aside from the obviously bloodied physical effect.
The police say the family have had a traumatic experience and don't wish to talk to the media. Because the case is before the courts, the police say they are unable to comment. The 23-year-old man charged over the shootings entered no plea when he appeared in court and was remanded in custody until his next appearance on May the 11th. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Youngtene.
11 minutes past 5. The government spent $30 million on special needs grants in the first quarter of this year, almost double what it spent in the same quarter of last year. Now, emergency accommodation, including motels and lodges, makes up $8.8 million of that. And that's effectively a new figure. The use of motels and lodges was a response last year to a housing crisis so severe that families were sleeping in cars. Te Puia and Te Manurewa Marae threw open their doors, and the issue of homelessness was very much centre stage. The government used motels, and as we revealed on Checkpoint, the cost of those motels was sometimes in excess of $1,000 a week for small and very basic accommodation. The government's still using that accommodation, although more permanent solutions are coming. And Associate Social Housing Minister Alfred Naro is adamant there's a long-term solution on the way. The government isn't scrambling to keep up, and taxpayer money is being spent appropriately.
So can I just really clear, this is not about being caught out. Actually, this is about taking responsibility. The first time any government has both been building social housing and transitional and emergency housing at the same time too. That has never been done before. Special needs grants also cover lots of things. It could be food, it could be power, it could be other issues that also emerge. Special needs grants are not just purely for housing. And now I can't break down all those figures for you, but I can get them for you, and I'm happy to do that. But look, the issues with special needs grants, if a family comes to us, and let's take the case, and as I sat down with the workers at the WINS office over in Papatoetoe and Hunters, they then talked about when the family comes through. It may be a housing need. Then they may say that there's issues around food. So they may need to get a grant to provide them with food. It could be the fact that they don't have enough to cover the power. Those are all included in a special needs grant. Now, when you think about the $8 million in their quarter, it's not just housing. There are a variety of different needs. If you want to get the breakdown, we can do that and get that for you. But right now, we think that investment, it definitely is making a difference. Like I said, both social and transitional housing is what we've been doing. No other government has done that before.
But you are making a virtue of necessity, Minister. You have been caught out, and because you have been caught out, this is a scramble, and it is an expensive scramble.
Well, John, I'd be very interesting to say that you're saying that we're scrambling. When we're working hard, we've got dedicated staff that are meeting the needs. We've got people that are now going into places that, number one, they've got a secure roof over the head. Number two, it's warm and dry. Number three, there's now food and power that's able to be met. And the other thing, John, that you also need to be reminded, we want to remind ourselves of, when I'm talking to the frontline staff, we know that at times we're dealing with some difficult situations for those families in their lives. They aren't always by choice, they are sometimes by circumstance.
Absolutely. How many people that you have in emergency accommodation at present are in motels or lodges, the sorts of places where you might normally stay for a night or a week or maybe 2 weeks?
So we've got 350 grants that are every week that are being made in regards to special needs grants.
300. So is that 350 unique and separate grants?
So sorry, that's just in Auckland alone. That figure is Auckland alone.
And what's the total cost of those?
I don't have the figure of the total cost of that. Like I said, we can find that out, but that's the number.
So you're able to tell me there's 350. So these are people staying in motels, lodges, the sorts of places where you might stay for a night or 2 or 3 nights.
That's right, they're transitional houses.
Okay, and that is highly expensive accommodation, isn't it? Over $1,000 a week in some cases.
John, look, yeah, we've said this before. When the fact is that you've got to meet the needs of those, and you've got to make sure they're safe, they're warm and dry. Once they're stable, then you can begin to address the other issues. So often when they're in emergency housing, it's because of a circumstance or a situation that's happened. The first thing you want to do is stabilise the situation.
Absolutely. And if you didn't stabilise the situation, I would be interviewing you right now and I would be saying there are people sleeping in cars and this is outrageous. And so, Minister, there is a level at which it appears you can't win. But there's a happy medium, isn't there? And that is not paying over $1,000 a week for motel accommodation because you and the government have been caught out by a crisis you didn't appreciate the magnitude of.
Oh, well, look, John, those are your words. They're not our words. And look, can I just say that when I've gone around and I'm constantly visiting both the emergency housing providers, we're talking about providers that are on the ground working with our families. We're talking about frontline staff that are there in our WINS office. This is not just about what happens in the Beehive in Wellington. These are the people at the front line working every single day with those that are in need. So the first thing that we're doing as a government is to meet those emergency needs as well. Second thing we're doing then is working with them to try and get a long-term plan together. We are confident that we are doing everything we can to be able to do that. John, that is not a scramble story. That is a story that's been around for a very long time. It's an approach that we're taking that we are doing all that we can to make sure that we meet those needs. The investment is right, the approach is right, and we know that those people who we're working with, as I said at the front line, are making sure that we're doing everything possible to be able to meet those demands and needs.
Right. Last time you were on, one of the things we discussed was the fact that staying in motels short term is very expensive, and you said you were going to buy motels, and I asked you how many you bought, and there was one. How many has the government bought now?
Well, like I said, at the moment, our team's been looking to see whether that's the right approach to take. I can't give you the figure on how many that they've bought right now.
So Minister, you can't give me the figure. Is there more than one?
Well, at the moment, like I said, at the moment, all I know is that there has been one that has been purchased previously. But look, what we have been doing is engaging with. I've been to some of the motel owners, so I personally have gone out to check to see these motels to know that the places that our families are going to, we want to make sure that they are the appropriate that are there as well. The other thing that I want to also to continue to throw that figure out that you may have forgotten. 650 houses of transitional houses we've already provided. That's for 2,560 families. We've got a build to June nationwide of 1,700. So it's not just about the motels. If anything, they are a short-term solution to a long-term plan, which is to provide transitional and social housing that's available there too as well.
Alfred Nara, the Associate Minister for Social Housing. We did that interview at about 4 o'clock, and since then the Minister or his office have confirmed that whilst no more motels have been purchased, the Ministry recently bought a former rest home and a 60-unit property. We're going to find out more about those purchases, where they are, what they paid for them, and so on, and we will report back to you. It's 18 minutes past 5. A step backwards for women. That's what the Council of Trade Unions has called a proposed law which aims to deal with pay equity. Now, it says a historic $2 billion settlement this week would not have been possible under the new bill. Christine Bartlett won her court case by comparing her female-dominated caregiving sector to another industry, arguing that if her work employed mostly men, it would be paid at a higher rate. The union's president, CTU President Richard Wagstaff, says the proposed bill limits the ability to compare between different industries. He spoke to our political reporter, May Heron.
We think in important aspects this bill is not consistent with the existing Act, and in fact, if we'd used this bill, we may not have arrived at that settlement this week. In particular, it causes real problems around the issue of using comparators for women who are making equal pay claims.
Talk me through the comparators thing. So what does this bill prevent an average day person from doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, essentially, what the legal decision, the most important aspect of that was that it enabled women to compare the rate of pay they were getting in female-dominated jobs to the rate of pay that men get in non-female-dominated jobs, and it allowed that comparison across industries. And that's how Christine Bartlett was able to demonstrate in her case that her whole industry and occupation was undervalued because it was female-dominated. What this bill does, it seeks to limit the comparisons that a claimant can make. It expects claimants to stick to people who work close to them in their same workplace or industry relative to a man.
Yeah, so mainly this really affects women-dominated sectors where it isn't as easy to compare person to person with the same industry.
Well, if you limit yourself to the same industry, you're not necessarily going to find the best comparator. And it's absolutely critical that women making claims for equal pay are able to find comparisons that expose the gender pay gap. And this bill, as it stands, inhibits that.
Michael Woodhouse says that he's already received some feedback from you guys. Did he respond to your concerns? Did he say why that they've included what they've included?
Well, we've made this point consistently, and it was an issue that came up in the Joint Working Group, and it wasn't recommended by the Joint Working Group. There was no agreement on this point. And we've argued this consistently with the government, that you are, in fact, inhibiting the ability of women to take fair claims for equal pay. We've made it clear that this is inconsistent with the Court of Appeal judgment, it's inconsistent with the Joint Working Group, it's inconsistent with the current Equal Pay Act on this aspect, and it really is a significant problem and it needs to be corrected.
Do you feel like after the step forward from this week with the settlement, this is a step backwards?
Well, if we can't correct it, it certainly will be a step backward from the existing Equal Pay Act.
Richard Wagstaff speaking to our political reporter May Heron. The government, for its part, says the bill is simply out for consultation. It welcomes all feedback, including that from the CTU. It's 5:21. We're going to have some sport now. The British and Irish Lions have been named, and if that means nothing to you, just consider it as an intellectual exercise. The job is to take the best rugby players from England, Ireland, Wales and Scotland, 4 countries who routinely play against each other with great passion, and turn them into a single team. And then every 12 years, you take them to New Zealand, where in this case you're subjected to a touring schedule so outrageously tough that winning the Test series really would be quite an achievement. The last time the Lions were here was in 2005, the second Test in particular in Wellington, in which Dan Carter played the greatest game of his extraordinary career, will long be remembered. An overnight Lions coach, who's New Zealander, Warren Gatland, announced his 41-strong squad, 41 players, for the 2017 tour. Here's our sports editor, Stephen Hewson.
And New Zealand have done it. They've won the World Cup again. And all those times where it's gone wrong in the quarters and the semis count for nothing.
Sir Graham Henry's enjoyed plenty of highs and lows as an international coach. So when he says the Lions tour here in June and July will be the toughest in the history of the sport, perhaps we should listen. Sir Graham, a World Cup winning coach, guided the All Blacks to victory against the Lions in 2005, having 4 years earlier coached the Lions in a series loss to Australia.
I think it's the most difficult tour in the history of the game. They're playing the 5 franchise sides who are probably the best teams in the super competition, and 3 tests in New Zealand Maori. That's a huge undertaking.
There's been a lot of criticism in Britain that there are 12 Welsh players in the squad and only 2 Scots, even though Scotland finished higher in the Six Nations Championship. One of the most notable absentees is England's New Zealand-born captain Dylan Hartley, who's missed the cut despite leading England to successive Six Nations titles. Hartley has a reputation as a fiery, abrasive and ill-disciplined player, but since taking over the England captaincy, he's tempered that attitude, which former Lions hooker and Ireland captain Keith Wood believes has affected his play.
He's a guy who is abrasive, naturally abrasive, and in the last year and a half or 2 years he's had to tone that down an awful lot, and I think it's actually been great because he stayed on the field for the vast majority and he's managed to lead very well, but it seems to have taken some of that abrasiveness that made him such a fine player away from him, and I don't think he's hitting the standards that he was in the past.
The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says he'd have picked Hartley, but he isn't surprised by the squad Gatland has gone with, and he isn't anticipating an expansive, free-flowing style of play from the tourists.
I think they'll tell us they will, but I think they'll try and beat us up first. Well, it's pretty much what you'd expect from Warren. He likes his big ball carriers in the middle of the park and his big grunty forward, so that's what he's picked. And I think this is the best British Lions and Irish team that we've seen come here for a long, long time. There's depth all the way through. That's why people like Hartley and some of the Scottish boys have missed out.
The last tour of New Zealand in 2005 was a public relations disaster for the Lions, with coach Sir Clive Woodward shutting off public access to the team. He employed British Prime Minister Tony Blair's former spin doctor, Alistair Campbell, which England halfback Matt Dawson says didn't go down well with the players.
Got hold of Alistair Campbell's phone and we phoned Tony Blair.
Did you?
Oh, yeah. We sent him all those, I love you, I think you're amazing, you'd love it out here, all of that stuff. Oh, he went bonkers.
The former Lions player Martin Williams doubts under Warren Gatland and captain Sam Warburton there'll be similar problems.
Sam will not give the All Blacks or New Zealand or the public anything to chew on, anything to bite on. Any team talks prior to the test matches, he'll say all the right things and all the right in the right manner. So in many ways, that's why he is the perfect captain for this tour.
The British and Irish Lions begin their tour with a match against a provincial barbarian side in Whangarei on June the 3rd. The All Black squad for the 3 tests against the Lions will be named the following week. For Checkpoint, Stephen Hewson.
Quite an extraordinary situation. They come out, they play 3 tests against the All Blacks, they play the Māori All Blacks, and they play all 5 New Zealand Super Rugby teams. It is a nightmare schedule. It's going to be a fantastic tour. Sweeping changes have been announced today for anyone wanting to become an Australian citizen. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull says aspiring citizens will need to undergo tougher English language tests and demonstrate a proven commitment to Australian values. And that has sparked a debate about how to define Aussie values, and MPs have found they can't really do it that succinctly. The ABC's Louise Yaxley reports.
Malcolm Turnbull made a feisty announcement of the changes early this morning in Canberra.
Are you proud of our Australian values? Are you a proud Australian? Well, you should stand up for it. You should stand up for those values, and that's what we're doing.
The PM challenged journalists to get on board with the Australian values that he says potential citizens will have to endorse.
But we need to ensure that our citizenship test enables applicants to demonstrate how they have integrated into and engaged with our Australian community. They've lived here as a permanent resident for 4 years. They speak English, share our values, be integrated.
The English test will be harder, which might be daunting for older migrants, but Mr Turnbull defends the change.
That will ensure that many people who had not learned English or had not been encouraged to learn English will do so. We're doing them a big favour.
The Immigration Minister Peter Dutton emphasises the concept of integration.
We are making no apologies for the fact that we do want people to be able to integrate. We want people to be able to send their kids to school to take advantage of a great education system. We want people to be able to work if they're of working age.
One of the changes is that people will have to be a permanent resident for 4 years before becoming eligible for citizenship. At the moment, it's 12 months.
The idea of that is for the demonstration of integration, of the ability to improve English language, to make sure that people can then demonstrate that they have been working if they're of working age with the capacity to work, demonstrate that they haven't been perpetrators of domestic violence.
Mr Dutton wants the citizenship test to change, saying at the moment it's essentially a multiple choice test. He was challenged on how to deal with people lying on the test.
People will lie. I mean, they lie now. That is not an argument for us to do nothing in this space.
Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce has given his version of why the changes are necessary.
You've got to accept there are certain things that might be culturally acceptable in other nations that are just not culturally acceptable here. We do not abide by people if they believe in genital mutilation for girls. And if you do believe in that, you can't become a citizen of Australia. We don't believe that as a polite way to beat up your wife. If you want to beat up your wife, you can't become a citizen of this nation.
And he spelled out his version of what Australian values are.
Egalitarianism, the fact that as the Deputy Prime Minister I can wander around without a bodyguard, the fact that my kids can grow up with a sense of that we believe that men and women are equal, that people have equal rights, you're equal before the law, you have freedom of religion, or freedom not to believe in a religion. It's completely and utterly your choice, that you basically leave people alone. If they're not annoying you, don't annoy them.
Legislation will be needed to fully implement these changes, and Labor hasn't yet said how it will respond. Penny Wong, the opposition Senate leader's initial response early this morning, was that it's inspired by pressure from the political right.
I think everybody knows this is all about Tony Abbott, this is all about one nation. But let's understand, what does our current pledge say? It says that you pledge your loyalty to Australia and its people, whose democratic beliefs I share, whose rights and liberties I respect, and whose laws I will uphold and obey. That's our current citizenship pledge. Now, I think those sentiments are pretty good.
That was Australia's opposition Senate leader Penny Wong ending that report from ABC's Louise Yaxley. New Zealand has no plans to follow Australia's lead by introducing a values test. The Prime Minister, Bill English, says the changes reflect a political debate in Australia and he has no intention of following suit here. You take over, Katrina. Okay. Well, then I'm going to just tell us what's coming up. But let's have a sting. Coming up between now and 6, why the Green Party wants to pick up winter electricity bills for hundreds of thousands of people. Bill O'Reilly gets the flick from Fox. They tried not to flick him, by golly. But it was just one hot chocolate too many. And the mammoth iceberg dwarfing a Canadian town. Absolutely beautiful if you're able to watch this. But the man we talk to is magic. Plus, Nona, who's from Canada and passes all values tests, is here. But first, Katrina with the headlines.
A proposed pay equity law has been condemned as fundamentally flawed and a step backwards for women. The Council of Trade Unions says an historic $2 billion settlement this week would not have been possible under the new pay equity bill. The man arrested for shooting 2 women has also been charged with holding up the Ashburton Hotel. The 23-year-old appeared in the Christchurch District Court today on charges of injuring with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and aggravated robbery. The police say the man knew the victims. The Green Party thinks a future government should help pay power bills for low-income households. It says electricity is too expensive for many and children can get sick from living in cold houses. New Zealand has no plans to follow Australia in introducing a values test for aspiring citizens. Applicants in Australia will be quizzed on whether they support its values and will have to pass a tough English language test. An 8-year-old girl who was rescued from Manukau Harbour after treading water for 2 hours is now out of hospital as the search for her father continues. The pair had been out on a fishing trip. The girl was pulled from the water after dark. A sharp rise in consumer prices might force a rise in interest rates sooner than expected. Official numbers show inflation is at its highest level since mid-2011. A senior economist says inflation is under control, but the Reserve Bank may still have to rethink keeping its benchmark interest rate unchanged. A 16-year-old boy killed by a train as he crossed railway tracks in West Auckland was wearing headphones and didn't hear the train coming. The police say the young man had been out for a run and hadn't heard the approaching train as he crossed the tracks. Family members out looking for the boy saw emergency services at the scene and learned of his death there. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Well, that's a heartbreaking story, isn't it? Thanks, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, inflation has spiked to its highest level in more than 5 years, driven by higher housing costs. Boy, we talk about that a lot on this program. Food and petrol costs. Will this cause the Reserve Bank to raise interest rates?
Well, maybe sooner than later, but what it will do is ensure that the Reserve Bank doesn't lower them. And before this latest inflation data, it was a bit iffy. The market was betting either way, that the Reserve Bank had been somewhat neutral in its policy, that its bias was, so in other words, it could have moved interest rates down or up. Now, I'd say pretty much the idea that they'd move interest rates down is off the table.
Okay. Where does this put in terms of its inflation goal, which is what, 1 to 3?
Well, they were looking, right in the middle, actually.
Yeah, okay.
And except that part of the reason why it's moved into that position is because of some one-off items.
Right.
So tobacco, there was a big increase in tobacco. Apple prices spiked in January and they've leveled off again. And there was, fuel, up and down motions in fuel. So those 3 things, the Reserve Bank will look through that because they're considered one-time items, whereas other things like, food prices generally, housing prices, those kinds of things, now that's new house prices and rents, right?
Absolutely.
Not house prices per se. So, those kinds of things are what the Reserve Bank will look at in the longer term. It was higher than expectations, not just from the RBNZ's expectations, but also what the market was expecting. So the inflation data will be watched closely, especially some of those really particular indexes, that the food, for example, would be one that will be watched carefully, because we haven't seen, our dollar has been lower, not today, but it has been lower, and And that we haven't seen whether that will be imported here through grocery prices and those kinds of things. So there'll be a lot of interest in what happens now.
Restaurant brands.
Oh, yeah, restaurant brands. Now, there's a bit of a surprise. Now, look, I have to say, I did try all day long to speak to restaurant brands with no success. However...
What do restaurant brands own? KFC, Pizza Hut?
Yeah, Carl's Jr.
Right.
And they own also Starbucks. That's in New Zealand. In Australia, they own about almost 50 KFC stores, and mostly in New South Wales. And they recently bought the Pizza Hut and Taco Bell brands in Hawaii and parts of the South Pacific. So overall, yeah, they have a lot of fast food. Now, they reported their full year result today. It was a very good result, one that, you know, was record strong sales here in New Zealand. $400 million of sales in New Zealand. And the balance was in Australia. Very strong, and I mean these are large increases.
$400 million. So that's revenue.
Just in New Zealand.
That's a heap of chicken and pizzas.
That's a lot of chicken and junk food. Sorry. I mean, excuse me, Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
Did I say junk food? I didn't mean it. Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, fast food is what I really meant to say. Yeah. So sales rose 28%. That's quite a big hike. Profit was also up 8%. But if you took in the one-time items, it was also up about a quarter of a quarter overall to $30.6 million. So it's a lot of money, but yet the market price fell today. Now, I tried to find out what was going on, but I really couldn't get the restaurant brands on the phone. However, they did give a private one-on-one meeting today with, I'm not sure, some investors, I guess. Don't know. That wasn't disclosed to me, and I wasn't able to speak to the chief executive. However,
if anyone from Restaurant Brands is listening who was mandated to speak on the wireless, give us a call.
Well, we'd sure like to know why their share price fell 2% on a result like that. That was by 10 cents to $5.25.
What did the rest of the market do?
Well, the New Zealand dollar, it held on to its gains that it made this morning. It finished the day at, 70.4 US cents, 93.7 Australian, and 55 pence. That's about where it was yesterday, but with the up and downs, it was still an improvement. The index overall, the top 50 index, fell 0.4% by 30 points to 7,188.
Nona Peltier here in the Auckland studio. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up to 23 minutes to 6, search and rescue teams have failed to find any sign so far of the father of an 8-year-old girl pulled from the Manukau harbour last night after a fishing trip went really horribly wrong. The girl treaded water for several hours before being rescued by Coast Guard's volunteers at around 7 o'clock last night. She was released from Middlemore Hospital this morning and is with her family as the search for her dad continues. Jessie Chang has more.
A police helicopter, the Coast Guard and an airport crash fire hovercraft have spent the day looking for the 52-year-old man. Specialist child interviewers are now talking to his young daughter. She was rescued after searchers heard her voice and pulled her cold and exhausted from the harbour. The police say she and her father had gone fishing, and it is still unclear whether they had been wearing life jackets. Water Safety New Zealand Chief Executive John Mills says it is incredible the young girl treaded water for several hours.
Certainly a situation that is very, very tough, but sounds very, very much like it was a miraculous situation with the wee girl if she did tread water for that period of time to have survived, so that's fantastic.
Senior Constable Gary Larson says the police are still trying to work out what happened. TK Ngātaki, a waka-ama paddler, says conditions in the Manukau harbour can be tough for those who don't know the area well. Mr Ngātaki, who has been paddling in the Pahurehura Inlet nearly every day for the last 4 years, says water conditions can change very quickly.
There's a westerly wind which is quite strong, the tide's also going out, so what happens there is that the tide's going one way, the wind's going the other way, and it actually holds the waves up, so it makes it quite choppy. And it can be like today where it seems sunny, but the conditions are actually pretty rough. That's a misconception, if you don't know what the tides are doing or the wind's doing, it can be quite swift moving.
Mr Ngātaki says he wanted to paddle out to Auckland Airport this morning, but big waves made him turn back, despite it being sunny. Constable Gary Larson says the police have been recovering the aluminium runabout this afternoon. He says the police will be scaling back the search as they lose daylight, and resume it tomorrow morning if the man is not found. For Checkpoint, ko Jessie Chang, tēnei.
1 in 6 15-year-olds in New Zealand are classified as an extreme internet user, according to the OECD. The program for international student assessment, done every 3 years, measures academic performance, but also asks teenagers how much time they spend online. Experts are telling parents not to panic. How much time kids spend online doesn't matter as much as how they are impacted by what they're doing on the internet. Here's Zach Fleming with more.
At weekends, nearly a third of New Zealand's 15-year-olds spend what the OECD says is an extreme amount of time online, more than 6 hours a day. On school days, that drops to 1 in 6, but just 3 years ago, when the last Piha survey was done, it was much lower. In 2012, just 1 in 16 was an extreme weekday user. But internet and gaming addiction psychologist James Driver says parents shouldn't jump to the assumption that's a bad thing.
It's important to look at the overall impact it's having rather than just the numerical figure.
That's a sentiment backed by NetSafe CEO Martin Cocker.
The raw number is how long people are online is becoming less and less relevant because so much of what we do is blended. We're online using a device but also doing something else. So just using that raw number doesn't really tell us that much that's helpful these days.
Yeah. So we should be more focusing on what?
Well, the key thing to focus on is what people are doing and then how that time online is affecting the rest of their life.
He says he's never seen any research showing a cut-off point where any more time online is negative.
There's no correlation between time online and any particular harm. No, there's really no definitive guide at all.
The guide, according to both men, is for parents to look for addiction. Are other parts of their children's lives suffering? James Driver says most internet or gaming addicts ask for help for 2 reasons.
The damage that it's causing to their relationships, whether that's with parents or with a partner or spouse, or the impacts that it's having in terms of neglecting other areas of their life. So that, the common ones being academic performance at school or university, people failing out, or the impacts it's having on their jobs. So, I've had people come in who've had warnings or have lost their jobs because they're spending so much time on the internet or so much time gaming.
The Piha study data shows a small link between extreme internet use and lower school attendance. But conversely, high users, those on the internet between 2 and 6 hours a day, were more likely than low users to want to attend university and more likely to want to complete Year 13. And high users' science test scores were the highest.
It's too easy to swing to either end of the spectrum, either seeing it as a harmless hobby or seeing it as, kind of a moral panic, something that's destroying our, youth or things like this. And I think it is really important to hold a more nuanced view of actually looking at, what function is it serving, what impact is it having, that kind of thing.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
18 minutes to 6. The Green Party wants to help pay electricity bills for hundreds of thousands of low-income people if it forms part of the next government. It would do this through a special winter payment costing the state more than $110 million. The party also wants to force large power companies to divulge their financial information to the public. Eric Frickberg reports.
The Green Party is one of many in Parliament but has leverage in a potential Labour-led government after September's election, so part of its policy could become reality. Its energy spokesman Gareth Hughes says electricity is too expensive for many low-income people whose children can get sick from living in cold houses, so the government would help pay their power bill.
The ability to help 520,000 households in New Zealand is going to make a huge difference, and we could get this in place by next winter.
Under the scheme, the money would be payable to all households earning less than $50,000 a year and would cover 75% of the average winter cost increase. Gareth Hughes insists it's affordable.
To put it in context, $112 million to help people with their winter energy payments is less than a quarter of what the electricity companies are currently returning as dividends. So for a small amount of that income, we could be helping hundreds of thousands of people.
In other moves, the party pledges to make electricity 100% renewable by 2030. But in a break with the last election, the party co-leader James Shaw has killed off the idea of all electricity being bought and sold by a single state agency, so-called New Zealand Power.
A lot has changed in the energy sector in the intervening 4 years, and so we wanted to develop something that was up to date. We also felt that the part of the bill that has continued to rise has been in relation to the lines companies. New Zealand Power was silent on that, and so we felt that it was necessary to take a look at that part as well.
The Green Party would also require electricity companies to reveal more details of their finances. There's been no response so far from companies themselves, but John Carnegie handles energy for Business New Zealand and says more public information isn't a bad thing.
It's about greater transparency, and we're all for greater transparency. Obviously the devil will be in the detail as to how they work that through with the industry. And, we're expecting them to, so that's positive.
The Green Party also says New Zealand's 29 local lines companies should merge or at least work together. The Electricity Networks Association responds that in many cases they cooperate right now. The Greens now need to convince the public and whichever party predominates after September's poll to get its policy or parts of it accepted. For Checkpoint, Core Eric Frickberg-Tene.
Bill O'Reilly is gone, Fox on the run. The highest paid presenter on cable TV was shown the door by the Murdoch network because the backlash against revelations he routinely sexually harassed female colleagues was starting to cost them money. When it wasn't costing them advertising revenue, Fox, on the face of it, seemed to be able to live with it. The network reportedly paid out $12 million to settle claims of sexual harassment or other inappropriate behaviour. But when that became public, advertisers started to walk, so O'Reilly had to as well. Acclaimed media writer Steve Battaglio has covered this for the LA Times.
It was becoming an untenable situation. Advertisers had abandoned O'Reilly's program. They had pulled their advertisements out of the show, moved them to other spots on the channel. So it was beginning to cost them money with every day that passed by. There were also, it put the Murdochs in the position of apologizing and paying out settlements for claims of pretty unsavory behavior towards women, towards their employees. It set a terrible tone for the company, and the Murdochs felt that there were more coming. They did not want to be in the position to keep having to deal with this, especially after they had gotten rid of Roger Ailes, founding CEO of Fox News, on the very same charges.
I'm reading your article, and I think the second paragraph is fascinating because you quote the Fox release, the Fox statement, and you say the company and Bill O'Reilly have agreed. So are we to read into that Bill O'Reilly has received a fairly substantial settlement to depart?
Oh, I would say it's very substantial. O'Reilly had signed a contract recently, and it did have an out in the event that something like this came up. At least that's our understanding. Nevertheless, it was probably a very substantial payment. Bill O'Reilly was believed to be earning in the range of $20 to $25 million a year.
Goodness, that's a lot of money, isn't it?
It is. It is. And so he probably walked out with a significant portion of that.
Stephen, can we broaden out? How influential is Fox in shaping US public opinion now? Not all public opinion, obviously, but the so-called Trump constituency, the way Trump played to a sense of voices excluded from the so-called liberal media.
Fox News tapped into that sentiment that there was this population out there who believed that they weren't hearing the whole story, when mainly what they weren't hearing was their side of the story or their beliefs espoused. And Fox caters to those people round the clock, not just with Bill O'Reilly, but with much of the other talent, too. That's one reason why Fox will be able to weather this loss. Even though Bill O'Reilly is the highest-rated cable news personality on television, it's likely a lot of his fans watch other people on Fox News, too, because they speak in very much about the same values and in the same tone that he does. One theory that I have about Fox News is that it's not really news, and you can also say this about the other cable news channels, too. It's companionship television. These are like-minded people who are talking about the things that are happening right now that you feel are important, and you want to have them in your house every day. Their company, and you agree with them most of the time. That makes you feel good, and I think that's the reason why this particular audience watches it, and they watch it for a long time. The length of tune-in is longer than most other cable channels.
Including, bizarrely, the President of the United States, who seems to be, on the face of it, judging by his Twitter stream, a big Fox viewer.
Well, it's not just that. He watches a lot of cable news, and make no mistake about it, he watches a lot of CNN and MSNBC too. But he has a comfort zone at Fox News. Rupert Murdoch has taken a liking to President Trump and what he's done and what he did in his miraculous campaign, and he's received very favorable treatment on the channel. They will always give him the benefit of the doubt. That wasn't always the case with other Republican presidents on Fox News. They would push back or question George W. Bush. That's not happening with Trump. And obviously, it feels good to watch TV where people are saying nice things about you. So not only is he watching, but he's going on there all the time. Fox News is the only place where the president has been giving sit-down interviews with TV interviewers and presenters since the inauguration.
Steve Battaglio, fantastic media and TV writer from the LA Times. We head now to Piha on the coast west of Auckland, where residents could have to prove their septic tanks are working properly and are regularly maintained in a bid to stop human waste polluting the community's lagoon. Piha Lagoon has been unswimmable for years, with dangerously high levels of E. coli, especially in summer. It's a fact strikingly at odds with the beach's reputation as wild, unique, extraordinary. Less than an hour from downtown Auckland, Anusha Bradley drove west.
I'm standing here on the edge of Piha Lagoon. It's a warm and muggy autumn's morning, and people are out jogging, walking their dogs. Kids are playing on the beach. And while this lagoon has often been a safe place for children to play, away from the wild surf that Piha's renowned for, no one's swimming. Between November and March, weekly testing of Piha Lagoon found E. coli levels of more than 500 parts per 100 millilitres, more than twice the acceptable level. Some weeks it reached as high as 2,800. For only one test the whole summer was the lagoon safe to swim in. As a child, Piha resident Ken Cowan would spend his summers playing and swimming in the waters, but now the 70-year-old won't let his grandchildren near it.
This pollution coming from many sources, including waterfowl and so on, but the main problem appears to be outfall that originates from septic tanks. What happens is that the level of sand at the entrance rises and doesn't allow the lagoon to flush.
Mr. Cowan, who's president of the Piha Ratepayers and Residents Association, says the organisation wants the council to periodically remove the sand build-up, allowing the tide to flush the dirty water away. Dave Bryant, a retired microbiologist, says the association's own testing of the lagoon before and after king tides or heavy rainfall, which naturally flush the lagoon, shows it works.
We certainly found that after the mouth of the lagoon opened, we actually got significant tidal flushing that the counts actually dropped considerably.
Sand has been building up along the west coast for the past 60 years. The environmental consultancy Tonkin & Taylor, hired by Auckland Council 2 years ago, recommended removing some of it from the mouth of Piha Lagoon. The council says it's too expensive, would require resource consent, and it's not a permanent solution. Its senior healthy waters specialist, Sarah Irwin, says it's better to tackle the issue at the source, and bylaws on septic tank maintenance are being considered.
Currently, the Waiheke Island has a bylaw, and that requires people to provide maintenance records, and then that is how we monitor what's actually happening in that area, and that seems to be working, so that's the kind of thing that we might be looking at.
Piha resident and owner of the Black Sands Lodge, Bobby Carroll, says she's sick of waiting for the council to act.
I'm just a little tired about all the hooeys. There's been hooeys for decades. We need to fix the problem at its source. I think it's time for Piha to be split into Piha Beach, that's the south, Mid Piha and North Piha, and we need to have some treatment systems set up.
An Auckland Council report estimates up to a quarter of the town's septic tanks are not working properly. It says installing a sewage system hasn't been considered for Piha, but if it were to, It would be something ratepayers themselves would have to pay for. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
From time to time, an image is just so striking it stops you in your tracks. And that was the experience of everyone in the Checkpoint office today, as one by one we marvelled at pictures of massive icebergs drifting by a Newfoundland town called Fairyland. One in particular is so close to the shore that it looks incongruous, like a neighbour. It happens at this time every year, ask the people on the Titanic. But this year they're so close and so striking that we called Charlie Dunn, the owner of Dunn's B&B in Fairyland, to ask him to describe the view out of his window. And Charlie, as it turns out, was a pretty excellent guy to call.
They're actually massive, massive pieces of ice, and the ordinary person really can't comprehend exactly how big they are. These are actually, some of them, millions of tons. There was one iceberg, and this is about, I'm going to estimate about 7 or 8 years ago, that broke off, and it was actually 60 square miles. That's how big this iceberg was. It was 5 years drifting south. So these are actually massive, massive pieces of ice. And if you can imagine, the one that's here in front of our bed and breakfast for the past 2 weeks, we went out in a boat. Now, we don't go close to the iceberg because pieces can break off, and where they're so massive, you only go to within a certain distance of the iceberg. But the water where we were to was 330 feet deep. So that iceberg was 330 feet. That was grounded. It was on the bottom of the ocean, 330 feet. And there was roughly about 100 to 150 feet sticking out of the water. So that's how big it is. And you can imagine that it was an iceberg similar to this that sank the Titanic 105 years ago.
And I didn't realise until Michelle, our producer, gave me the notes that the Titanic went down about 600k off your coastline there.
The Titanic went down off the coast of Newfoundland, about 600 miles south of Newfoundland, and that was 105 years ago, on the 14th of April, 1912. And here in Newfoundland, we have a lighthouse, which is called Cape Race Lighthouse, and that was the lighthouse that received the wireless message from the Titanic the night that it sank.
Right, so it was one of these icebergs that happens at this time every year, and at the moment the one that everyone is absolutely besotted with because it's just off from your B&B, is it?
Well, it's just off from the B&B. We're living right on the ocean here. We're living in that. I look out, and of course I'm looking at a lighthouse that's just out from the bed and breakfast, and we're in this little harbour here. So just out from the harbour, that's where this iceberg is to. That's as far as it could get into the harbour. And the reason that it's causing so much excitement here is because it's the only one that's close to shore right now. And it's an odd shape. We have, right now, the Department of Transportation in Canada are estimating that there is between 400 and 500 icebergs that are drifting south that are actually out into the shipping lanes. So these large ships and container ships that are coming and going from Canada, the United States to Europe, they actually have to alter their course because you've got those icebergs that are out in the shipping lanes.
Charlie, I'm loving talking to you, and I want to go. You make me want to go to Fairyland. What's it like? I'd love to come. What's it like, your little town? How many people live there?
Right now, there's would estimate about maybe between 400 and 500 people. We're living about 75 kilometers south of the oldest city in North America, which is St. John's. The whole population of our tiny island of Newfoundland is about 525,000 people.
And what do you do? So you run a B&B. You do a bit of crayfishing, do you?
I run a B&B, and I'm a crab fisherman. I fish for snow crab.
Can you describe what's the best way of cooking them?
The best way of cooking them is you steam them. You only put them in, of course. It's a terrible thing to say, but you put them in like you would with a lobster. They're live when you put them in, and just add like a drop of water, a small drop of water, a little bit of salt, and they're mostly steamed. That's the way we cook them here. And basically, we try to cook them with salt water as well, if you can do that.
Oh, and one final question before you go, and I hope you don't think I'm being rude here, but your accent is beautiful. And were you originally Irish? I know you've been there for a long time, or is that the Newfoundland accent?
Newfoundland, actually, if you left St. John's, and the area that we live in is called the Irish Loop.
Right.
It's called the Irish Loop because about 95 to 96, 97% of all our ancestors here are a mix of English and Irish.
Well, I can't recall the last time I learned so much from a single interview, Charlie. How to cook crab, what the icebergs are up to, and the geographical makeup of your beautiful part of the world, and sociological and anthropological. But bloody hell, Charlie, you should be on Radio New Zealand more often.
Well, you know something, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I hope that, that your listeners will get something from this conversation, and feel free at any time to call, or by all means, come to Newfoundland. We'd love to see you. Charlie Dunn, what a delight. Lots of feedback coming in on emergency housing and the high cost. For the interview with Alfred Naro. The situation would not be so dreadful if rents were not so high all over Auckland due to investors and new immigrants buying up houses, says Sue. And Paul says, hi John, the fact is National has waited for 9 years for the markets to sort this problem out, and the fact is they haven't been able to. This minister is talking to people like they're idiots and is just repeating things that the general public already know about and have known for a long time. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. Unions say an historic $2 billion settlement this week would not have been possible under a proposed law. The pay equity bill has been condemned as fundamentally flawed and a step backwards for women. Here's our political reporter May Heron.
The settlement came after caregiver Christine Bartlett won her court case for more pay by comparing her female-dominated rest home sector to another industry. Ms Bartlett argued that if her job employed mostly men, staff would be paid at a higher rate. The union's president, Richard Wagstaff, says the proposed bill limits the ability to make those comparisons. The PSA says the bill slams the door on future claimants and encourages perpetual discrimination. The Workplace Relations and Safety Minister, Michael Woodhouse, says the bill is out for consultation and it welcomes the feedback. Consultation closes on May the 11th. From Parliament, May Heron.
Water Safety New Zealand says it's miraculous an 8-year-old girl who was rescued from the Manukau harbour last night managed to survive in the water for so long. But there's still no sign of her 52-year-old father who was on a boat with her. A police helicopter, the Coast Guard and an airport crash-fire hovercraft have spent the day looking for the man, and the police say they'll be scaling back their search as they lose daylight. The girl was rescued after searchers heard her voice and pulled her, cold and exhausted, from the harbour. Water Safety New Zealand's Chief Executive, John Campbell, says it's incredible she treaded water for several hours.
Certainly a situation that is very, very tough, but sounds very, very much like it was a miraculous situation with the wee girl, if she did tread water for that period of time to have survived. So that's fantastic.
John T. Mills. The man arrested for shooting 2 women near Christchurch last night has also been charged with holding up the Ashburton Hotel soon afterwards. The 23-year-old appeared in the Christchurch District Court this afternoon on 2 charges, injuring with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and aggravated robbery. The police say the man, who has name suppression, knew the victims. Neighbours say the 2 women are mother and daughter and run a poultry farm. Both are in hospital, one in a serious condition and the other with moderate injuries. Paul Michael, who runs a nearby nursery, paid tribute to his neighbours and says he's sad about what happened. A 9-year-old Hastings schoolboy wearing a shark onesie has been missing since this morning, and the Hawke's Bay police are asking the public to help find him. Blair Crabtree was reported missing from his home on Outram Road in Akina at about 5:15. He was last seen walking along Heratonga Street and Willow Park Road. Blair is described as being about 1.5 metres tall with straight brownish-blondish hair. He has fair skin and hazel eyes. RSA members selling Anzac Day poppies were kicked out of an Auckland train station because they didn't have a permit. The treasurer of the Otahuhu RSA, Leslie Guptill, says they've been selling poppies at the Otahuhu station for several years and have never been told they need a permit. But Ms Guptill says they were approached by a security guard this morning who told them they weren't allowed to be there and asked them to leave.
You felt terrible because I'm a person that likes to do things the right way. Had I known we needed a permit, I would have got a permit.
Leslie Guptill says Auckland Transport has apologised for what happened. Auckland Transport says it spoke to the security guards and told them they should use their discretion in these sorts of cases. A spokesman says a number of RSA branches have applied for permits to sell poppies at Britomart and Manukau stations tomorrow. The Green Party wants winter energy supplements to be paid to all low-income households to help them cover the cost of their power bills. The party has just released its electricity policy, which also sets a goal for 100% renewable energy by 2030. It says the energy subsidies would be designed to smooth out power bills by covering 75% of the average winter cost increase, and it would vary by region. It estimates more than 500,000 households would benefit. The supplement would be paid for by existing government funds, including taxation and energy company dividends. A cash security van has been robbed in Auckland this afternoon, closing a section of a main road. The police say 2 people ran away with some cash from the van on Dominion Road in Mount Roskill at about 4:45. They say the area is being secured and cordons are in place. The police are working to establish whether the offenders were armed. Auckland Transport says Dominion Road is closed between Mount Albert Road and Jasper Road and delays are expected. It's 6:05. To sport, and the Mind Games have already started ahead of the British and Irish Lions tour of New Zealand, despite the opening match being over a month away. Coach Warren Gatland today named a 41-strong party for the 3-test tour, which kicks off in Whangarei on June the 3rd. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says this Lions side has much more expectation on it than any other.
It's going to be a very good side, and they'll come with a lot of expectation, which I think is going to be interesting to see how they cope with that. A lot more expectation than they've been used to, because people expect them to win.
Steve Hansen. The former New Zealand golfer Phil Tatorangi says world number 1 Lydia Ko is a victim of her own success. The 19-year-old hasn't won a tournament on the LPGA Tour since July last year. It has gone through 2 caddies, a coach and club changes since then. She's narrowly holding on to her number 1 world ranking after a 2nd place finish in Hawaii at the weekend. Tatorangi says the reason Ko is no longer winning titles as regularly is because the LPGA Tour has become far more competitive since her run of 8 wins in 2014 and 2015.
That's equally as responsible for the differences in her performances this year, rather than just being in her control. Sometimes you come up against other players that are just playing at a higher level than they were a year ago.
Phil Tatorangi. New Zealand's Steven Adams and his Oklahoma City Thunder side are struggling in the first round of the NBA Western Conference basketball playoffs, losing Game 2 to the Houston Rockets 115-111. They now trail 2-0 in the best-of-7 series. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nigel Adams discusses the diet of gannets. But how do you work out what gannets eat without cutting them open? Our Changing World investigates the science of noise and whether our modern lives are sending us all deaf. And Miles Buckingham continues his celebration of Jamaican music. This evening we move beyond the beat and the politics to celebrate vocal harmonies. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, cloudy periods and a few showers. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty, and the Central High Country, mainly fine. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington, cloudy periods and a few showers, clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, mainly fine, but a few showers for coastal Marlborough, Golden Bay and northern Buller, showers clearing Marlborough tonight. Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with isolated showers later. Canterbury and Otago, fine apart from a few showers about Banks Peninsula today. Southland, cloudy periods and a few coastal showers, and the Chatham Islands, showers and strong cold southwesterlies, both easing tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
We're going to Arkansas next, where, if the governor has his way, it's execution season. But first, a man accused of shooting a mother and daughter in Canterbury has also been charged with robbing the Ashburton Hotel at gunpoint a short time later. The 23-year-old man, who has name suppression, appeared in the Christchurch District Court this afternoon. He was charged with 2 counts of injuring with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and aggravated robbery. Conan Young has been talking to neighbours of the victims, and he joins us now live by live view outside the Christchurch District Court. Hi, Conan. Lovely to talk to you as always. Can you talk us through the events that led to this man's arrest?
Yeah, sure. Look, the shootings happened at about 10 o'clock last night at this very sort of rural property. It's actually a poultry farm that's owned by the 2 women who were shot. The shooting happened about 10 o'clock, and then the man, the police allege, the same man actually robbed the Ashburton Hotel. That's a good 60-70 away from where the shootings have happened. The robbery involved a gunshot being fired and cash being taken. The police then undertook a manhunt. The Armed Defenders Squad was busy all night, and then ended up at Rakaia Huts, which is from Ashburton Hotel. That's further coming back. I guess the person alleged to have done this has backtracked back to the Rakaia Huts, and at 7 o'clock this morning the Armed Defenders Squad actually arrested the person, the man that's been charged at those huts. So unclear at this stage why, as the police allege, this person also decided to rob the Ashburton Hotel as well as carrying out these shootings.
Conan, you've been speaking to neighbours. What have they been saying?
Yeah, look, as I guess you'd expect, really shocked by what's happened. They've described the mother, one of the people we believe who was shot, as being really bubbly, really friendly. One neighbour actually told me, look, this family has experienced another tragedy about 18 months ago. The father died in a fishing accident. He was diving apparently, and we understand had a heart attack. So, look, another tragedy for this family. Another thing for them to deal with, but all of the locals that I spoke to said, look, this family's lived in the area for a really long time, and they're really well thought of, and that, they couldn't believe that something like this had happened.
Conan, how are the women doing? The 2 women and their immediate family, do you know?
Look, all we know at this stage is that one is in a serious condition in hospital, the other one in a moderate condition in hospital. They've been there since last night. The police put out a statement and said, look, this has been a really traumatic event for this family, and that they don't want to talk to the media at this stage.
And what happened in court today?
Yeah, look, earlier here today, the man the police say is responsible for these shootings, he appeared in court. He was tall, blonde hair, was wearing a polo shirt. Look, we don't know anything else about him. We're not actually able to say anything else about him because he has name suppression. That's interim name suppression. He entered no plea to these very serious charges that he's facing, and he was remanded in custody. He'll be back here in court again on May the 11th.
Conan Young live from outside the Christchurch District Court. Thank you, Conan. It's coming up to 12 minutes past 6. We head now to Arkansas, where 8 men had been scheduled to be executed over a week and a half beginning on Monday. 2 executions a night on the 17th, the 20th, the 24th and 27th. There's not been anything like it since the death penalty returned to the US in 1976. Grotesque and unprecedented was one description. But Arkansas's governor was undeterred, citing the need to use an execution drug before its expiry date, and in doing so raising the public ire of the drug company, which said its drugs were for saving lives, not taking them. One by one, though, the executions are being stayed by the courts. It's unsure now if any will go ahead, at least in the short term. But this week began with 7 men due to be executed. And among the critics of that was Patrick Crane, who worked for the Arkansas Department of Corrections and once ran death row. A lifelong Republican, he didn't oppose capital punishment until he met an innocent man on death row, Damien Eccles, and until he observed how many of the men awaiting execution were mentally ill or intellectually impaired. He spoke about this with journalist Creed Newton from The Intercept. It's a striking article which you can read on The Intercept's website. I spoke to Creed Newton earlier, just as another execution had been stayed.
So the man who was just given a stay of execution, his name's Stacey Johnson.
He has DNA evidence that was collected in the 1990s that was never tested that could exonerate him. And also he's had, as they've all had, incredibly terrible legal representation over the years.
Yes, I'm reading from
just finding this out.
I'm reading from your report, which is quoting a Harvard report, that Little Lee, his legal counsel was habitually inadequate. So these are public defenders. They've got lots of cases, and they're simply not up to it.
Yes. I think one of Liddell Lee's, it was either Liddell Lee or Stacey Johnson, one of their lawyers had to be removed from court for being drunk.
And this is in a death penalty case?
I think it was on appeals, but it was for capital murder cases, yes.
And reading again from your excellent report for The Intercept, Don Davis, believed to have an IQ of somewhere between 69 and 77, which is in the range of intellectual impairment. Bruce Ward, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and appears not to understand that he's about to die, believing instead that he's preparing for a special mission as an evangelist. Both these men were scheduled to be executed.
Yes, they were.
And so who was driving this and why?
The death penalty it's very popular in Arkansas, and it's still very popular in a lot of states in the United States. It's always, so the criminal justice system in the U.S. is very stressed. There's a lot of cases. Prosecutors don't want to lose, and they also don't want to go soft on what the public perceives as horrendous criminals. So in a case, for example, Stacey Johnson, who was just given a safe execution, the victim he was accused and convicted of murdering, her 2 children were in the house overnight with the body of their mother. These were all grotesque crimes, but the problem is that there's a lot of questions about the trials surrounding them. So the prosecutors, if someone is accused of murdering a mother as their 2 children are in the house, and there is the option of the death penalty, there's no reason that a prosecutor would want to not go for the harshest of sentences, the harshest of punishments for these alleged crimes.
The fascinating thing about your article is, well, there's a lot of fascinating things about it, but the really riveting central character is this man, Patrick Crane, who formerly worked on death row in Arkansas and has kind of had a road to Damascus experience, really, in terms of his attitude towards the death penalty. Can you tell us about him?
Patrick Crane, he worked in, he told me that he worked in Arkansas for the Arkansas Department of Corrections simply because he needed a job, and he stayed there for a while to support himself and his loved ones. Damien Eccles, he told me, was the case that really changed his mind regarding the death penalty because Damien Eccles was still on death row while Crane was there. He also he told me he knew all of the men. He had at least met all of the men who were sentenced to death and were supposed to be killed over the next 10 days. He said that most of them appeared to be mentally ill or mentally unstable and intellectually impaired as well. He didn't think it was right to put these people to death. He said they're in cells, they're not going anywhere, there's no reason. He's also a very devout Catholic, so he doesn't agree with most instances of the death penalty for that reason.
He also talks, and I'd never thought of this, of the impact of killing 7 men over 10 days on the staff who are required to do that, the people who are required to take them through to the death chamber and strap them to the gurney and do that work. And he says, and there's a fantastic quote in there where he imagines himself being one of the parents, having to explain to his children what they did at work today.
Yes. The interesting thing about these teams is that these aren't the men who work on death row. These are men from other prisons in the Arkansas Department of Corrections system, the prison system, and they are asked to volunteer to be executioners. It's not really known because the protocols surrounding the executions are kept secret, but it's not known if they're given bonuses or what the motivation for becoming an executioner might be. But as Patrick Crane said, this portion of Arkansas is not wealthy. So if there are any economic incentives to be doing this, then it's very likely that these men who aren't paid well, typically prison workers are not paid very well, they would go for it, but they're not trained very well. And there's a lot of evidence from many different researchers that shows that these teams are not trained very well. They're relative. I mean, they deal with prisoners on a daily basis because they work in the prison system, but they don't typically kill them, as far as we know. So putting these men to death it's going to weigh on them no matter what.
Craig Newton from The Intercept, and you can read his article online. The government is being urged to crack down on carbon-intensive construction that wastes power amid warnings that the country's climate change targets are really in jeopardy. The calls follow a new report criticising the building industry throughout the developed world for failing to limit buildings' carbon footprints, saying New Zealand is among the worst culprits. Emile Donovan reports.
The report from the Climate Action Tracker Group says carbon emissions from buildings more than doubled between 1990 and 2010, mainly through higher electricity use. It urges property developers to adopt strict efficiency standards, or New Zealand's Paris Agreement target of carbon neutrality by 2050 will be in jeopardy. The chief executive of the Green Building Council, Andrew Eagles, says while some countries are making sweeping changes, New Zealand is lagging behind.
Across 27 countries of the EU, they have a goal for near zero energy buildings and new homes from 2020. In New Zealand, there's no plans. So not only do we have no trajectory, we don't even have a plan to talk about it.
He says the best way to save on electricity is to cut heat loss in new buildings, creating a warm, dry environment that doesn't need heating. Another issue is the amount of carbon dioxide produced in the construction process. Manufacturing steel and concrete are both carbon-intensive processes, but Andrew Eagles says that can be tackled with new technology.
We are seeing more cross-laminated timber coming through, and of course then you can say that the timber sucked up carbon during its life and not as much has been used in the development of the building.
The director of Bailey's Real Estate, Lloyd Budd, says there's a lot of demand from tenants, particularly commercial tenants, for environmentally friendly buildings.
Fundamentally, it saves money. Something as simple as changing out lights for LED reduces your power bill. Using less water puts less strain and less costs on a building, so there are obvious cost savings.
And Mr Burr says the benefits aren't just financial.
There's also considerable brand benefits. Some airlines or major corporates now have sustainability policies. Large corporate international occupiers even have it mandated in their leases now that buildings must achieve a minimum green or NABERS rating for them to occupy.
All of which begs the question, why aren't environmental building standards already in place? An environmental advocate who helped edit the report, Cindy Baxter, says that needs to come from the government.
What we need is for the government to be introducing strict building standards so that all the new buildings that are built are actually zero emission. And it's all possible these days. But you need the right kind of policy packages put in by the government for that sort of thing to happen.
And Andrew Eagles says the sooner the government enforces change, the better.
We are multitude times behind even poor performers. So we've got a long way to go.
The construction sector is one of 3 industries analysed in the report, which give the electricity generation and transport sectors a much more favourable review. For Checkpoint, ko Emile Donovan Tēnei.
We're going to stay with the building sector in a way. A proposal to install measuring devices in buildings around the capital could help authorities make quicker decisions about which areas are safe following a big earthquake, should one happen. The devices provide an immediate snapshot on how different types of buildings have been affected by a large quake. Anne-Marie May filed this report.
The Wellington City Council says current ways of measuring earthquakes do not give an indication of the ground acceleration and other forces buildings are subjected to. Its head of innovation, Philippa Bowron, says the project is still in its early stages, but if accelerometers were installed in about 400 commercial buildings, the data gathered could be very useful.
So we'll get a variety of different building construction materials, different building heights and shapes, and buildings that are built on different soil types. So if we get a good enough spread of those, we can tell what's happened with pretty much every single building in the city.
The veteran Wellington property developer Mark Denijczyk doubts the accelerometers will have much practical use. He points to an example from last year's Kaikoura earthquake.
A seismograph was installed and two buildings on either side performed totally different. So how they can get a practical use out of it is beyond me, because the difference of the result on the building, despite the same shaking, was absolutely different.
However, Philippa Bowron says the accelerometers would help civil defence to make decisions about which areas of the city would be safest after a significant earthquake.
We're always going to get variations in Wellington from building to building because there's different construction types and the soil type changes quite a lot quite quickly across the city. But I think having a saturation of around about a third of the buildings will give us a really good view.
Wellington's Chamber of Commerce says the devices would give workers more confidence about what's happening in their workplaces. But its Chief Executive John Milford says the cost of installing accelerometers should be shared.
I don't think the ratepayers should bear it all. I don't think the property owners should bear it all. I'd like to think government will bear it all, but they probably won't. But I think it should be a discussion around, look, how do we fund this in the most equitable and fair way?
The council says it will be a couple of months before any decisions are made about introducing the accelerometers, and no decisions have been made yet about who will pay for them. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
It's 24 minutes past 6. Fox, Rupert Murdoch owned, of course, has dumped its Star Cable News host Bill O'Reilly following allegations of sexual harassment. Pressure mounted after recent reports that 5 women had received $13 million total in payouts because of O'Reilly's behaviour. The primetime presenter, who's been with the US network since its inception almost, has denied all of the allegations. He said it's tremendously disheartening to leave over completely unfounded claims. Amazing fact, advertising revenue from his show somewhere in the region of $120 million, which is why Fox was so reluctant to give him the flick. Until, well, let's let CNN's Brian Stelter explain the rise and fall of Bill O'Reilly.
Caution. You are about to enter the no spin zone.
Bill O'Reilly is a Fox News original who got his start as a local news reporter.
Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Bill O'Reilly.
He later went on to report for both CBS and ABC News. In 1989, O'Reilly joined Inside Edition. He anchored the show for 6 years. Known for his big personality, even back then, O'Reilly also became known for his temper.
Okay. We'll do it live. Okay. We'll do it live. It. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. And thing sucks. In 5, 4, 3. That's tomorrow, and that is it for us today. I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks again for watching.
O'Reilly took a break from television in 1995 and enrolled in the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, where he got a master's in public administration.
Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight.
The following year, he was hired by Roger Ailes to host a show at a startup network called the Fox News Channel. The show was a huge hit. For a time, O'Reilly also hosted a radio show, which combined gave him a massive audience for his outspoken conservative views.
Free law advice.
But for all his fans, O'Reilly also earned nearly as many detractors. He was called a bully for his aggressive interviewing style. And at a book fair in 2003, liberal comedian and now Senator Al Franken called him a liar to his face.
Okay. All he's got in 6.5 years is that I misspoke, that I labeled a polka war to Peabody. He writes it in his book. He tries to make me out to be a liar. No, that's shut up. No, you had your 35 minutes. Shut up. Welcome to the report. Good to have you.
O'Reilly was the chief inspiration for the bombastic conservative character played by Stephen Colbert on Comedy Central. The show routinely poked fun at some of O'Reilly's more controversial comments.
Papa Bear Bill O'Reilly has found yet another reason she should be taken out of the not yet running.
There's got to be some downside to having a woman president, right? Something.
But his controversial comments were not what would eventually bring O'Reilly down. Accusations about his behavior toward women started surfacing in 2004 after a Fox News producer filed a sexual harassment suit against Fox News, alleging O'Reilly repeatedly spoke to her about his sexual fantasies.
The last time that I had spoken to Bill, and when this inappropriate conversation had happened the last time, he said it was going to be in person, and I felt extremely threatened for many reasons.
O'Reilly vowed to fight the charge.
This is the single most evil thing I have ever experienced.
And filed a countersuit for extortion. The case was settled for a reported $9 million. And it didn't end there. In 2016, after accusations about Fox News founder Roger Ailes became public, some women also came forward with allegations against O'Reilly. Fox investigated Ailes, and he stepped down under pressure. The New York Times started looking into accusations against O'Reilly as well. Just a little more than 2 weeks ago, the Times story detailed a total of $13 million in settlements between O'Reilly and Fox and the women who had accused him. The reaction was fierce. Advertisers pulled out of O'Reilly's show by the dozens. And just like that, the cable news king, who once seemed untouchable, is off the air for good, at least at Fox.
CNN's Brian Stelter with that report. It's funny, you cover the weighty subjects, the big things, but you do an interview with the man in Newfoundland, a place called Fairyland, about an iceberg, and the emails just flood in, and they're lovely. Max says he was in Newfoundland this time last year. He says it's magic. It's like being on the West Coast. Yeah, it looked a bit like the West Coast, a little bit like the Catlins too, I thought. Thank you, Mac. This really lovely email from Beth in Christchurch. John, that chap did not tell you the most important thing about Fairyland, which is the ongoing archaeological dig that's happening there. It was originally settled in the 1500s, I think, by settlers under Lord Baltimore, who then moved to settle in Maryland at Baltimore. They abandoned Fairyland because the conditions were too severe. The archaeological dig is gradually uncovering the original town and is absolutely fascinating. They make new finds every day, and you can see the treatment of the archaeological finds in their lab and the associated buildings. The icebergs are just the icing on the cake. So that was from Beth. And Harry tells us beautiful berg pics, but small compared to a 300-kilometre long B-15 that carved from Ross Ice Shelf in 2000, or the descendants of Little Teardrop that got to New Zealand in 2006. That's right, I remember that. Carved in the same event. Thanks, Harry, and thank you for all your feedback. Yeah, Charlie Dunn, who owns the B&B in Fairyland, Newfoundland, was just magic describing those icebergs. One of them is very, very close. It looks like a next-door neighbour, really, as you look out his window. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. We really appreciate your company, and we will be back here tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Unions say a proposed law would have scuppered an historic $2 billion employment settlement. Water safety campaigners say it's a miracle an 8-year-old girl survived in the water for hours after the boat she was in capsized. The man arrested over the shooting of 2 women near Christchurch has also been charged with the armed robbery of a pub. Anzac Day poppy sellers have received an apology after they were kicked out of an Auckland train station. The Greens are pushing for low-income households to receive help paying expensive winter power bills. New Zealand has no plans to follow Australia in introducing a values test for aspiring citizens. A sharp increase in consumer prices may force a rise in interest rates sooner than expected. And the Mind Games have already begun ahead of the British and Irish Lions tour of New Zealand. Our next news and weather is at 7.
They're the only ones who know.
It is